Before we start, 3 warnings. 1. The album critics call her masterpiece. It's not in my top 5. 2. The brand new sequel beats the original. And no, that's not recency bias. I'm allowing it because I am genuinely that impressed. 3. The album the world called her worst, the flop, the career killer, is in my top 3. It's one of the best albums she ever made, and I will die on that hill. 15 studio albums, 43 years, let's settle this. Madonna's studio albums ranked from worst to best. Some ground rules before we start. Studio albums only, and the studio album as it was released. Standard track listing, no deluxe editions, because then we're comparing things against things that aren't equal. And look, these are just my personal preferences. Any ranking is ever going to come down to personal preference. That's the whole game. So let's try and keep the comments civil, shall we? Let's start at the bottom. In at number 15, the transparent cash grab. MDNA is probably the most egregious crime in Madonna's discography. It's trend chasing in a way I find so transparent and appalling, and it contains some of the worst songs in her entire catalog. I'm looking at I Don't Give a, Gimme All Your Lovin', and that was my opinion before all of the Nicki Minaj drama. Girl Gone Wild is just so embarrassing. Gangbang is horrible. Madonna promoting gun violence on a record was never something I thought I'd see, but here we are. There are moments of brightness, however. I do like Turn Up the Radio in its simplicity, but it's a blatant ripoff of Martin Solveig's Hello, so it's not impressive in any way. And when I say ripoff, I know she wrote it with him, but still, they're replicating that vibe. And there are some more interesting songs on the end of the album, I'll grant it that. Masterpiece, Falling Free, Love Spent, but you can't front load an album with absolute garbage and expect people to wait around until track 10 to hear something interesting. Is anybody out there still? In at number 14, the moment the trend chasing began. Hard Candy is really the album where Madonna started trend chasing, which makes it a crime in the discography. Candy Shop is horrific. It makes me want to stick ice picks into my eardrums. 4 Minutes I actually don't hate as a lead single. I love the beat. I love that it's intense, it's dramatic, and it's great fun to listen to. It was one of those collabs that didn't seem forced, you know, Justin Timberlake and Timbaland, it makes sense. And I don't think Give It To Me is terrible either. Of all the artists that have gone to the Neptunes or Pharrell Williams for a hit, I think it's one of the more natural sounding songs. Unlike, for example, I Was Gonna Cancel by Kylie, which I find to be an absolute abomination. I do like Miles Away from this album, and Devil Wouldn't Recognize is a song that's always in my playlist because it's a really great song. But overall, it's really not that great because it isn't clear what she's trying to say or what she's doing on this album. There's no overarching theme or narrative or idea that makes it a cohesive body of work. It's a collection of songs created by the producers of the minute, by one of the most successful women in the industry, and it just goes to prove that all of those things together can't make an impressive album. And they can't guarantee you a hit. At number 13, the concept that wasn't seen through. Rebel Heart is an interesting album because I remember thinking at the time that this was a real return to form after Hard Candy and MDNA. Living for Love, I think, is a great lead single. Ghost Town, I love. I like Hold Tight, and I even have a soft spot for Body Shop. I'm not afraid to admit it. Holy Water is also a decent song, but all of that is ruined by songs like Unapologetic Bitch and Illuminati and Bitch, I'm Madonna. What is this woman's obsession with these badass gangster-adjacent, grill-wearing wannabe hip-hop moments in what could have been a really beautiful album about Madonna's rebel heart? Because, again, this is a concept that isn't seen through. Yes, Bitch, I'm Madonna could be read as a rebel anthem, but what I actually wanted to hear from Madonna at this stage in her career, at this point in her life, was, yes, you've been a rebel. You've been one of the most rebellious and influential women in pop music, pushing boundaries, pushing the envelope for women, opening doors, breaking down barriers. Tell us about that. Tell us what it felt like. Tell us why it was important to you. Tell us what it felt like to be persecuted for being that person, threatened with arrest, forsaken by the church. All of those could have been interesting stories, and they're reduced down to Bitch, I'm Madonna, which is just so unbelievably reductive. And for that, this studio album has been shunted down my ranking over time. At number 12, The ambitious mess. Madam X sits here because I think it deserves praise for being ambitious, for leaning into something she's proven has worked for her before. You can see what she was going for on this record. There are elements of American life here, elements of even Ray of Light. She's being political, she's talking about important topics, and I want to celebrate that because that's what I love to hear from Madonna. But the execution lets it down. It's messy in places, and again, we're resorting to bitch tropes, which I wish she would just stop. But there are some really interesting moments here. God Control is a highlight for me. It shows how she can play with the form of pop music in a way that many artists just wouldn't dare, and she deserves props for taking risks like that. And to make an album this ambitious, just really shirking radio, which is what this did. I mean, she had Medellin as the lead single with Maluma, which I enjoyed. I thought it was a good single. But this one is too much concept and not enough pop accessibility. I respect it for what it was, and it was also the first time I saw Madonna live at the Wilton in LA. It was a theater show. We were in the second row, and I was sat right behind Dave Chappelle, and she came out into the audience and drank from his beer, which was an insane moment. And of course, everybody's phones were locked up because we had to put them in Ziploc bags when we got through the door. So that moment just exists in my memory, which is why I do advocate for locking phones up at gigs. In at number 11, The Origin Story. The Madonna album is obviously a classic, and people might scream that it's this low in my personal ranking, but that's the nature of ranking the music of a woman who's been active in the music industry for over 40 years. Something somewhere along the lines has to go lower than other things, and for me, this is not an album I come back to very often, despite loving Borderline. It's one of my favorite Madonna songs of all time. And Physical Attraction is having a real renaissance at the minute, people pointing out that it's a massively underrated song, and that's right. But as a body of work in its totality, do I think it represents the best of what Madonna has to offer? No. Do I think it showed promise and indicated where she might go next? Yes, absolutely. The wistfulness, the melancholy of Borderline, despite it being this really happy, upbeat song, is one of my favorite things about this album. It's one of my favorite songs in the entire Madonna discography for that reason. And it does two things at the same time. It's one of the origins of heartbreak disco pop, the music that we've come to love, the music that many of us have come to love. So should it sit higher because it was the thing that started everything? I personally don't think so, and I don't think it's a disrespect to put it there. It's here because of the nature of everything that came after it, which was just so much better. And that's what we want from an artist, to see evolution and progression and daring. And that's everything that Madonna represents. I'm not discrediting the album or saying it's poor. There's just so much better that she did after it. At number 10, the birth of the whole package. Like a Virgin is an improvement on the debut. It's Madonna leaning into creating the complete package for the first time. Material Girl, it's a song, but you can also see the vision for the music video, for the creative. Like a Virgin, again, a great pop song, but you can see how the whole package would come together visually and how it would be sold to an audience, and what she's saying and what she means by it. This is the moment we start to see Madonna, the creative and marketing visionary, start to appear. I do love her lower register on Stay, and Dress You Up is a fun pop song, but the music at this point sounds dated. The style has not aged very well, and whilst it was very innovative and cutting edge at the time with Nile Rodgers on the desk and all the synth parts and the drum loops, it hasn't aged well in terms of its sonic identity, despite containing, like I've mentioned, glimmers of the brilliance she would go on to generate in her career. Do I think it's the strongest album in her discography? Absolutely not. But it's ranked more highly than others because it's less offensive to me and because it really is the catalyst of everything she would become later on, say, Like a Prayer. This is where we start to see that woman start to materialize. The provocation, the marketing moment, the music video auteur, all of that begins here. And for that, it deserves a higher place on my list than the debut and above the more egregious entries in her later discographies, the ones that piss all over what this album did to allow them to exist. If you're already mad at me, you may as well just hit subscribe, because it's only going to get worse from here on out. Go on. Okay, at number 9, The Great Leap Forward. True Blue was a great improvement on Like a Virgin. The music and the production become more ambitious, the storytelling becomes more impressive, the range of influences we're hearing widens. Overall, it's an incredible 80s pop album that contains some of her most iconic moments. Those opening drums on Open Your Heart will always be one of my favorite moments in Madonna's entire discography. It just sounds so exciting and hopeful. Live to Tell is stunning. Papa Don't Preach hints at the feminist icon that she will become or already was, but leaning into more. And La Isla Bonita is one of my favorite songs by Madonna, full stop. So why is it only number 9? Because I personally don't love it. So much of the music we love is the experiences we have with that music. And I was 3 years old when this album came out. I don't really have any memory of this music aside from one time in my mum's car driving to Scarborough to go to the beach, and Papa Don't Preach was on the car stereo. Although I actually think that was coming from a copy of the Immaculate Collection, not from this album. True Blue is a more impressive album than everything I've talked about so far, but I don't have a personal connection to it beyond my appreciation for some of the songs, and that's why it doesn't sit higher in my personal ranking. It's an incredibly tight, concise, strong record that demonstrated Madonna was able to improve on her prior work, album over album. And that 80s growth would peak with Like a Prayer. At number 8, The Resurrection Dethroned. When I sat down to create this ranking, this is an album that I thought would rank much higher. But Confessions 2 has really done a number on my thinking about this album in her wider discography. Obviously, there's recency bias playing into that. We've had Confessions on a Dance Floor since 2005, and I do think it's a phenomenal Madonna album. But I saw this take somewhere and I completely agree with it. Confessions 2 is the superior album, but the singles are better on Confessions on a Dance Floor, and I think that was perfect. I can't remember where I saw it to give credit, but bravo. That is absolutely the perfect take. Hung Up is a career highlight for Madonna. Get Together is phenomenal. Sorry, while not being my personal favorite, was a huge successful single. And I have so many memories of this album. I was living in Leeds city centre at the time, and I had a BMX, and I remember it just being dark, and I was riding my bike to work. I lived in a lockkeeper's cottage on the canal, and I was riding along the towpath to my job with Get Together in my ears, and it was cold and dark, and it really has that memory attached to it in such a strong way. There are really ambitious moments on this album. I love Isaac, for example. Let It Will Be, I absolutely love, but I do think the album trails off a little bit toward the end. I know some people love Push, but it's not one of my favorites at all. And I Love New York has grown to be a little bit cringe over time. These days, I tend to skip that one. But overall, it's a really strong album, a really cohesive album, incredibly well produced, and it showed a level of ambition and dedication to musicality, to the craft of album making that far surpasses everything I've talked about to this point. And for that, it deserves a much higher placement than anything I've talked about so far. The only reason it's not higher on my list is that there are albums I love more, and that's just the nature of making a ranking. I'm not saying Confessions is a poor album. I'm not even saying it isn't one of her best. I think it absolutely is. It's just that with everything else we've got to talk about, this is where it sits. I need to stop justifying myself, but I can just see the comment section already, and I just want to be clear that I'm not saying things are bad. In at number 7, the classic. 37 years later, this album is still the moment, isn't it? This album is that bitch, to coin a phrase Madonna loves and that I criticized her for earlier. Even just looking at the track list, it's obviously the best thing she'd produced up until this point in her career. Like a Prayer is the icon, the song that put Madonna on the global map in a way she never had been before. The peak moment up to that point of Madonna leaning into controversy, generating media manipulation, and I say that positively because she was a master of it. And then you open the album with Like a Prayer, which is just such a phenomenal, incredible artistic statement, and that's before you even consider the visual packaging, everything it achieved, the conversations it started, the moment that it was, and then you head into Express Yourself as track 2, which is insane to me and incredible sequencing, because those two songs in any normal world do not belong together, but on a Madonna album, it's perfect. She knows exactly what she's doing, and it's evidenced right here. Express Yourself is an LGBTQ+ anthem, and it comes immediately after one of the most famous takedowns of the church ever created in pop music. Cherish is another favorite of mine, one of my favorite singles of hers, along with a song like Borderline. This album is just hit after hit after hit. The production is definitely an improvement over True Blue. It's grander, more cinematic, more ambitious. It shows who her influences are. There's definitely a Prince influence there, and looking to greatness is how people with that potential achieve it themselves. And her level of ambition is what's so apparent about this album. So why isn't it higher on my list? Again, this comes down to personal preference. I was 6 when this album came out. I was vaguely aware of who Madonna was because she was unavoidable. You know, newspapers around the house, the television on. Saturday morning music television is a British institution. I don't know if that translates in the US as much as it does at home, but even as a 6-year-old, I was aware of who she was and what was happening with her career. But it isn't higher in my ranking because I think she achieved greater highs later in her career with other projects. But she couldn't have had the opportunity to make those records without the way that this record paved. And look, I know this is the second time I've told you an album is lower because I wasn't old enough to live it. That would be a problem if I were using it to rank this album poorly, but I'm not. I'm saying this is one of her best albums, or very close to it, despite the fact that I have no real memory of it being around at the time. I'm so defensive in this video. Anyway, that's how good it is. Top 10, come on. Okay, in at number 6, The Punishment album. Erotica is a really interesting one because in the eyes of the wider public, and I've spoken about this before, specifically in my main Pop Girl of 1992 video, this is the album where she went too far. I think a lot of the way this album was received was probably a punishment for Like a Prayer. And the fact that she then doubled down and did something even more shocking. I mean, that's what Madonna does. That's why she's great, and that's why I'm ranking it higher than Like a Prayer. She really had balls to put this out at the time. Now, Like a Prayer is probably an album I've listened to more than Erotica, not enjoyed more, but explored more as I became familiar with her work. Now, Like a Prayer is probably an album I've listened to more than Erotica, not enjoyed more, but explored more as I became more familiar with her work. I was 9 when Erotica came out, so again, it wasn't an album I listened to at the time, but it is an album I've come to appreciate greatly over the years. And it was actually GHV2 that got me here. I really became a Madonna fan with Bedtime Stories, and that grew and grew through to American Life and Confessions. But GHV2 introduced me to Deeper and Deeper, and as soon as I heard that song, I thought, where has this been hiding in her discography? And that's when I started to look backwards to Erotica. Deeper and Deeper is incredible, Rain is phenomenal, I love Secret Garden, the title track is incredible. I've never been a huge fan of Fever, personally, that's just my personal taste. Bad Girl is great, Thief of Hearts is great. Overall, Erotica is a really strong, daring, brave album, and you have to think about the wider social situation at the time. We're talking about the AIDS epidemic, and Madonna is here releasing a house album with underground sounds rather than overt pop sounds. She's working with Chet Pettibone, and they created magic, real dance music magic, from the clubs, from the underground, for the people who were in that world. It's definitely an album for the gays to a certain extent. She was really leaning into that, being an ally, making music for the audience that she had built around her. And I think this might be the turning point in Madonna's awareness of who her fan base really was. I can throw a lot at the wall and hope it sticks with a wider audience, or I can lean into creating music for my core fan base. And that's what Erotica does so well. She's breaking down barriers for women, yes, but she's also doing it by acting like a gay man to a certain extent. And I think that's a really interesting proposition, which makes this album a really just dynamic listen. So I'm ranking it above Like a Prayer because of its ambition, its bravery, and what it represents in her catalog. Whilst it's not my personal favorite Madonna album, it's undeniable that this was a watershed moment. Everything from this point onwards upwards shifts into a higher gear than everything that came before. Erotica is an album that deserves its reckoning, its validation, and probably an apology from the wider public. Not that I think Madonna cares, but as a fan, as someone who appreciates the music, that's well overdue. Okay, at number 5, the sequel that beat the original. Recency bias is real, but I'm allowing it because I genuinely am that impressed with this album. Back in November, I made a 20-minute video confidently predicting that this album would be filled with what I called industrial gospel. Profound, spiritual, Madonna's big meaning of it all record. And I was very confident and honestly a little bit pleased with myself about an album that did not yet exist. And then I pressed play and my entire view shifted about 1,000,000% by track 2, because Confessions 2 is not Confessions on a Dance Floor Part 2. The original was a pop record with dance elements, every song built to be a radio smash. This is an out-and-out hardcore dance album for people who love and really know dance music across the entire gamut of its subgenres, and it's sequenced the way albums used to be, as a journey. It moves like an actual night out. The party at home, the line outside the club, the night of your life, the basement at 2 a.m., the come down on the sofa, and then waking up tomorrow feeling like you died. Been there. Been there. And the bravest thing on it, Fragile, the song about her brother, isn't hidden at the end where albums usually put their sad songs. It's placed deep in the middle of the dancing, with a heartbeat in the production that slows to a stop, because that's where grief actually shows up, deep in the basement, long past midnight. For my money, that's the best sequencing decision on any Madonna album. Now, is Confessions 2 a better album than Like a Prayer? I know that's a questionable opinion, but Confessions 2 does something Like a Prayer cannot, because it was released 43 years into Madonna's career. Nearly every track on the album reaches back to an earlier Madonna era, or a landmark in the lineage of dance music. French Kiss and Future Lovers inside the opener, Nothing Really Matters behind One Step Away, Erotica's Fingerprints all over the basement with My Sins Are My Savior, Little Star answered by her own daughter 28 years later. From a lesser artist, that density of self-reference would be a nostalgia grab. But from Madonna, it's something only she can do, because no one else alive has this much dance music of their own to quote. So I stand by it. She couldn't have made this album at the point she made Like a Prayer. And that in itself grants it something that allows it to sit above work that came before it. Song for song, today, it wins over the original. Deeper bench, better sequencing, and it does everything the original does without hiding behind the mix. The singles are better on Confessions on a Dance Floor, I stand by that, but the album is better here. Ask me in a year when it's had the chance to become a part of my life fully, but today, this is where it lands, and I stand by that opinion. At number 4, the Victory Lap. Now, I think people might find this placement controversial, and I get that, but I personally love music. I think it's an incredible album. I love the aesthetic, the cowboy Americana vibes. I think the Mia Wace production is phenomenal. I love how it leans into French electro house before that ever became mainstream. I mean, I guess you had Daft Punk around at the time, but Daft Punk was still an underground dance act breaking through with One More Time at this point. I love how sonically ambitious the album is. Impressive Instant and Runaway Lover are phenomenal. I love Nobody's Perfect. I love Don't Tell Me with the chopped up acoustic guitars. The video is incredible. It's one of my all-time favorite Madonna videos. I love what it feels like for a girl, especially the Paul Oakenfold remix in the video. And I love it when Madonna shows us she's a literary queen, because she quotes The Cement Garden from Ian McEwan's novel. I don't know if it's actually from the novel or from the movie, but I know she reads well. I love Gone also. Music isn't as profound a statement as Ray of Light, and it's not as political as American Life. Sitting between those two albums, it's like a palate cleanser, honestly. She could have come back and done more Ray of Light, but she didn't. She came back and did something completely different, and I absolutely commend that. And a lot of this comes down to the fact that this was an album I was able to go and buy at the time and experience in real time, which is not something I can say for a lot of Madonna's early discography. And I do think preference and ranking often comes down to the music that you lived with. I remember remember being at house parties, and I'm not advocating drug use here, but coming out of a ketamine-fueled hole and seeing the What It Feels Like for a Girl video on MTV and been utterly transfixed. She looked incredible in that video, the bob, the poker straight hair, and then how it contrasted with wavy, natural Americana of Don't Tell Me and American Pie. This is a victory lap album to me. That's how I see it in the discography. Ray of Light was this critically acclaimed moment, all this praise she'd never really had before, the awards, the industry finally acknowledging her brilliance, and you can't do that again and again. But on music, she sounds comfortable. She sounds like she's having fun. She's carved out a real lane. She's carved out a real lane for herself. It's easy to listen to. It's confident. It's concise. It doesn't challenge you as a listener, but it's still super impressive. It's like she realized she didn't need to shock to make great music or get attention for it, because Ray of Light wasn't trying to shock either. It was just great, honest, genuine music. On music, she wanted to have a party to celebrate, and that's why I love it. It's really that simple. At number 3, The Hill I Will Die On. American Life is one of Madonna's best albums. I think her creativity peaked on this album. The journey she'd been on through the 90s culminated in this moment, and it completes a trilogy for me: Ray of Light, Music, and American Life. If I could only listen to 3 albums from Madonna, those 3 in chronological order give you a real taste of who she is and what she does best, in a way I don't think you can say for any other 3 albums that sit together in her catalog. The lead single, there was obviously all the controversy around it, but I think it stands up. The production is jarring. The Mia Waste production is jarring, and that's purposeful. It's meant to prod. It's meant to poke. It's meant to make you feel uncomfortable. Even the lyrics, she's calling out American culture, consumerism culture, and it needs to sound aggressive. She'd been the Earth Mother. She'd been fun Madonna, and she came back wanting to poke and prod, and she got exactly what she intended. The way this was received in the US was a real issue because of that prodding and the timing, but that's what Madonna knows how to do. And some of her most introspective and honest moments since Ray of Light exist on this album. Ecstatic Process, Easy Ride, Nothing Fails. Massive highlights in her discography to me. I think people dismiss them because the production is so specific, and it just so happens that I love the production on this album. The continuation of the Americana vibes from Music, interspersed with tougher beats, electronic, chopped up, auto-tuned elements. It takes what she did on Music and it turns it into something tougher, something more future-leaning, and it's genuinely sublime. I remember Love Profusion being a huge single in the UK. Hollywood did really well too, and obviously we got the VMAs moment with Britney and Christina from this album era, and I love I'm So Stupid with those held notes that are completely auto-tuned, like all the life is taken out of them. It just works so well in the context of the song. The production is helping tell the story, and that's what's so great about it. Ecstatic Process is one of my favorite Madonna songs of all time. I'd even Die on the Hill of Die Another Day being a great song. I remember buying the CD single. My Madonna fandom really peaked with this album. Not that I didn't enjoy Confessions, we've already talked about that, but American Life is a more interesting album to me. It's more creatively ambitious, it's a more impressive collection of music to listen to for me personally. It isn't trying to appeal to the mass market, it's doing what it wants to do, and it's not sorry about it, and I love it for that. At number 2, the album that brought me into the fold. Bedtime Stories is the album that brought me into the Madonna fandom. I think it was Human Nature I saw on TV and was utterly transfixed. And I remember Take a Bow being huge as well. And I think it was around the time Evita was being filmed, so I was very much involved in that because I've always loved Andrew Lloyd Webber musicals as a kid. Yay! I bought the album when I was 11, so I was young, but I knew this was music and an artist I was intrigued by. I could tell that she was creative, ambitious, and was never going to do something the same way she'd done it before. You really get that vibe from her, even from single to single. You know, juxtapose Human Nature next to Secret or next to Take a Bow. They're completely different. And this album is so fascinating because it's a real pivot in the sonic identity of a Madonna album. She's really leaning into R&B, working with Nelly Hooper and Babyface, straddling the R&B world and the pop world, because that's where the charts in America were going at the time. Not so much in the UK. We were still very much on a house dance kick, which I loved. My first CD ever was Full On Dance 93. Take from that what you will. It was too unlimited. But I will say this, Eternal were big at the time in the UK. They were kind of the premier girl band or girl group at the time, and they were very much singing, R&B as well as gospel standards, and interspersed with, pop R&B and pop gospel. And the Always and Forever album with Louise was incredible, and then the Power of a Woman album came out and my Eternal fandom peaked. And I think the Power of a Woman album was 1995. So the sounds on this album were something that I was very much familiar with and felt like I wanted more from, because I was getting that itch scratched from Eternal, but I wanted more of the kind of R&B sound. So yeah, I love this album. I love that she opens it with Survival, because this was a survival. It was her survival instinct that made her make this album, and that's a part of her genius. Secret was a great single. It's a song I still come back to all the time. I'd Rather Be Your Lover. I love that song too. And we even get it referenced on Confessions 2, which is incredible. Inside of Me is a beautiful ballad. I think she wrote that one about her mother. Human Nature is the ultimate badass song, a fuck you, hidden on an apology album, as I've talked about in my Bedtime Stories deep dive, which you can watch. I'll put a link in the description below. I love Forbidden Love, and Sanctuary is gorgeous. And Bedtime Story is probably one of the most ambitious songs she ever made. Written by Nelly Hooper, Björk, and Marius de Vries. Madonna didn't write it, but she tacked it onto the end of her album anyway, along with Take a Bow. Take a Bow, the Evita audition song. Bedtime Story was the real indicator of where she wanted to go sonically, the seed of what would come to fruition on Ray of Light in a few short years. So this is such a pivotal album in her career, and I'm so glad I found her at this moment, because I do feel like I grew up with her to a certain extent. To start here, at the beginning of this real creative moment in her career, I'm really happy I found this album, and I'm really happy I stuck around, despite what a lot of you might be typing in the comments right now. Because Ray of Light changed the way I thought about music forever. At number 1, the masterpiece. I mean, what can I say about Ray of Light that hasn't already been said? I do think there's an opinion out there that I've heard that Ray of Light is the album people choose as their favorite to sound more cultured or worldly or quirky than they really are. But to me, this album will always be Madonna's best album, because this was an album I got to go buy on CD at Asda, I think, and it changed the way I thought about music forever. It changed what I thought music could do. It taught me that music could mean something. It could be rich. It could communicate multitudes. It could sound like nothing else I'd ever heard. And I remember being transfixed when the video for Frozen would show on the box, the music request channel in the UK, and Ray of Light sounding like nothing I'd ever heard before. It absolutely blew my mind. Those were the two I'd really see on TV. Nothing Really Matters as well. That video was pretty huge. The Power of Goodbye, I never really saw the video for growing up, but the song is sublime. It's always been one of my favorites. If I had to reduce her entire career down to one album, this is the album I would choose every time. So no, I'm not picking it to sound cool or cultured or quirky or indie. I'm a Spice Girls fan, for God's sake. I love Steps. I don't care about being indie. I'm picking it because it's genuinely my favorite Madonna album. From the outset, Drowned World, Substitute for Love, she tells us she traded fame for love without a second thought. It all became a silly game and things just can't be bought. She's opening the record by telling us what she's learned and how she learned she was wrong. That's such a fascinating concept to me. And songs like Nothing Really Matters are so deep and rich. The Power of Goodbye is so affecting. To Have and Not to Hold, Little Star, all these moments are so full of meaning that great pop songs songs intended to shock seem almost cheap alongside them. And I'm not saying those songs are cheap or that they didn't do what they were intended to do. Everything was a stepping stone to this moment. But when you put them next to what she's saying on Ray of Light, it all seems a little bit less than, and that's just my truth. It's sublime. I've sat on beaches in Thailand and put this album on and just watched the sunset, sat in the water in awe. And it's been that way since 1998, and it doesn't show any sign of changing. What an absolute masterpiece to have in your discography. I don't measure other albums against this one because what Ray of Light does is so singular, but I do think that Confessions 2 carries elements of it. It's doing something equally profound, spiritual, and meaningful, and that's why it climbed so far up my ranking. Not just recency bias, it's proving, like Ray of Light proved, that the form can take the weight of a life, and we get that wonderful callback with Lola Leon to Little Star. It's such a beautiful touch, which makes me say this. Madonna was willing to go back to Stuart Price, so why not go back to William Orbit? I would love to hear what those two would cook up now. People say Madonna doesn't like to repeat herself. Well, that's shot to shit now. She has repeated herself, and it was incredible. So go back to William Orbit and make an album. He's said many times he's tried reaching out to her and she's never come back to him. I don't know why that is, especially when the two of them together created something this magical. Yeah, that's why I want to hear next from Madonna, and I won't apologize for it. It's interesting to me that my top 4 albums are from one specific stretch of her career, and I don't think that's accidental. Most people will tell you that Madonna's Imperial phase was the 80s. She was the culture during that time, and that's partly the nature of how things have changed. There were fewer stars back then, which is why stars shone more brightly. Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, Madonna, those are the names that come to mind when I personally think about the 80s. In the 90s, the field began to broaden as we've become a more global society. By the 2000s, with the internet, things shifted again, and now it feels like there are no real superstars anymore. Madonna and Mariah are really the last standing superstars, and that's a conversation I don't want to get into in this video because comparing Mariah and Madonna will start an argument I just don't want to have. But Madonna's creative peak for me was that period. Honestly, I'd argue it starts in 1992 with Erotica, runs through Bedtime Stories, Ray of Light, Music, and American Life, and it gets polished off by Confessions. But if I had to slim it down to one decade, I'd start with Bedtime Stories and end. But if I had to slim it down to one decade, I'd start with Bedtime Stories and end with American Life. That is the peak of Madonna's creativity to me. And that's a really interesting proposition. Maybe you agree with me, tell me in the comments. Maybe you think she was doing something more interesting on True Blue or Like a Prayer or Like a Virgin, that stretch. But personally, in the 80s, she was still fighting to prove that she deserved to be where she was, aligning herself with legends to earn her place. By the 90s, she wasn't fighting to maintain relevance anymore. She had the freedom to challenge herself, to push the boundaries sonically, in the production, in the songwriting, in everything. That's why the 90s peak is the most interesting to me. She was really experimenting rather than proving that she deserved to be there. While everyone worships the 80s icon, the real Madonna was just getting started to me. It's starting to sweat under these lights. So what's left to say? To me, the scale and scope of Madonna's career is one of the most interesting we've ever seen in the music industry. There's a saying, and it was actually Madonna herself at the Billboard Women in Music Awards: the most controversial thing I have ever done is to stick around. She could have retired a long time ago. She's a very rich woman, but she's a true artist, a true creative. She has something to say. She's proven she's a superstar, proven she deserves to be regarded this highly, over and over and over again. And that's why Confessions 2 has been so great to see. The reception to this album really did pull her back, especially critically, from a place where people weren't very kind toward the later albums. And whilst I've ranked those albums quite low, that's preference. I'm not intending it as cruelty. It makes me really happy that she's released an album that's been this well received, because it goes some way to undoing that damage. And I've seen a lot of conversation about the fact that it was actually her label that failed her through those years. The Live Nation deal felt like a smart move at the time. Music was being devalued valued and the money wasn't in sales anymore, it was in touring. So I'm not criticizing the decision, but I don't think she was getting the support she needed or deserved from that label. I think it was Interscope, or there's a quote she gave that's been floating around, how refreshing it was to not have to go to writing camps. And it's very clear that MDNA and Rebel Heart were the result of exactly those kinds of collaborations, not genuine meetings between artist and producer, but label-mandated sessions, strong suggestions from the label. Her coming back to Warner, who own her back catalog and have a vested interest in seeing this project succeed, well, they've done that, and it shows that maybe Warner is where she belonged all along. After all those years out in the wilderness making the middling albums that end up at the bottom of my ranking. So this creative renaissance has me really excited about what she does next, if she does anything next. Because one thing I took away from Confessions 2, and I don't think I said this in my review or my reaction, is that if this was the last album of her career, it will be the perfect final album. It's a celebration of everything that came before. A perfect bow on one of the most impressive careers we've ever seen. Don't you think so, Queeky? Now, I don't think that's the case. I think she's always going to be making music, but whatever she does next has to be brilliant. And I have every faith that she can do it now she's back with a team and a label that support her creative vision. And if someone put a gun to my head and asked what I wanted Madonna to do next, reunite with William Orbit. I know people will say she doesn't repeat herself, she doesn't go backwards, but she's worked with Mia Wace across multiple albums, Stuart Price twice, Shep Pettibone, Patrick Leonard. So why not William Orbit? It's clear that he would love to. And for someone reaching the point in her life that she is, with those glimmers of spirituality on Confessions 2, I'd love to see that explored in real depth. Because she was telling us everything is consciousness. Creepy! Shh! Because she was telling us that everything is consciousness. She wasn't showing us why. And that's not a critique, that's the next album. That's what a William Orbit record could hold. So, thanks for watching. There's a wealth of Madonna content on the channel, my Bedtime Stories deep dive, my Ray of Light deep dive, the Confessions on a Dance Floor deep dive, my Confessions 2 review, and the full Confessions 2 first listen reaction is in the listening room on my Patreon, and it's free to watch. Drop me your top 5 Madonna albums in the comments. Let's chat, because that's what I love about this channel, talking pop music with people who agree and disagree, but don't insult me or call me stupid, which is what tends to happen when I talk about Madonna. We do it because we love the music. Thanks for watching.